Hi everyone, and welcome back to the workshop for a completely new video. Over the last few months I've been producing a number of videos about how I've been race preparing my Kyosho Neo 3.0 and how you can use a ready to run buggy on a racetrack and race the car. The plan for this year was always to carry on racing the Neo 3.0 as a race ready buggy, but at some point in the year to build an out and out race prepared vehicle, such as one of these. This is the Kyosho MP10 TKi2. It was released earlier in 2021. I wasn't going to buy one of these until later on in the year, but due to global supply chain issues through the COVID pandemic, there's only 3 of these cars remaining in the country at the moment. I'm in the UK and it's Friday the 30th of April 2021 as I'm recording this. There's only, at the start of this week, there was only 3 of these cars in the country. 2 were in a shop in Hertfordshire and the other one was in a shop in the Midlands. I was told by one of the shopkeepers that I spoke to that when these cars are gone, the earliest they're expecting to get new stock in the UK will be mid-July 2021, which is some months away, and that's if everything goes according to plan. I decided to strike while the iron was hot and buy one of these cars. I ordered it on a Tuesday. There was at 10:30 on the Wednesday morning. There was a knock at the door and it was parcel force, and this rather large box had arrived. It's quite a heavy box. There's a lot of stuff in there. All this is at this moment in time is a rolling chassis. There's no radio gear in the box, there's no engine, there's no pipe, there's no ancillaries. Plan is to build this car over the next couple of weeks, and I'll then decide what engine I'm going to put in there. Haven't actually decided yet. There's a number of popular engines on the market at the moment. I'm probably going to go with an OS engine because I've used OS engines in helicopters for many years and I rather like them. Before I start building, let's just have a look, open the box and see what's inside. It's well packed. So we've got the usual Kyosho stickers and the manual. That looks like the differentials bag. Differentials are the first thing that you build in one of these. Set of wheels, but there's no tyres in the box. I'll have to. Luckily, I've already got some wheels and tyres to go on this car, but I'll have to buy some new tyres and foam inserts to go in there at some point. You've got the air filter bag. That's the clutch. Ooh, pins are already on the flywheel, which will be a great help. And that's the engine mount as well. We've got what looks like the front suspension arms. Radio trim, well there's even some fuel tube in there. And there's a big high flow fuel filter in there as well. Fuel tank, etc. Side arms that go on the chassis. Chassis supports and the drive shafts, etc. Got what looks like the central diff supports, servo saver and engine mounting plate. Suspension bag. Those shocks look absolutely awesome. Got a wrench. That looks like the front suspension components and all the little bushes you can use to set the right side up with. Body shell, very nice. Aerofoil. And last but not least, we got the chassis. That is a really nice looking piece of machine metal in there. Everything's been reamed out to keep the weight down and all the engine plates go on there. I'm going to have a look at this now. The first thing I'm going to build up will be the differentials. There's a front and rear diff to build and the middle diff to build. So that's the differentials built up. On the left we've got the front diff, middle, centre diff. Right is the rear diff. Building those up was really straightforward, took all of about 25 minutes. There's even a little tub of grease included in the kit which made life a lot easier. Just got to fill the nail with the silicone diff grease that goes in there. I'm going to go for 5,000 middle, 5,000 front, 3,000 rear. There's 12 bolts that hold 12 bolts that hold the 3 diffs together. Just got to build those up, get them bolted on, and then it's time to start building the front gearboxes up. So that's got the front and rear diffs into the gearbox case, and we've got the front diff, centre diff, rear diff. All of this is relatively straightforward really. The only bit of a problem was there's some bearings that go in there, and there's another one behind them. They were really tight to get in, and I had to use a vice as like a bearing press to get them in. Otherwise, it's all in and that's the gearboxes assembled. Next stage is to start building up some of the chassis components. So that's got the side plates on. That was relatively straightforward. A couple of the screws are a bit on the stubborn side, but everything just wound in there eventually with an Allen driver. Next job to do is to mount the engine plates. So that's got the front two steering posts on, got the engine mounting plates on there. Next job to do will be to build up this front steering mechanism. All very, very straightforward so far, and it's going really, really well. So that's got the steering gear installed. That was a very, very straightforward setup. There's absolutely no slop in there whatsoever. I like the touch of that little sponge in there that will stop dirt and grease getting in there. There's some movement in there for now, but those screws are only temporarily fitted. Again, that bolt's only in there as a placeholder. Next thing to do is to build up the suspension arms on the front and rear suspension, which will be the next job I'm going to do now. So that started building up the rear gearbox. Those bushes are interesting because they're a tunable part. I used the setup recommendation that I got off of a Kyosho tuning website. I think it's near enough the same as what was in the manual, but that's the one I'm going to go along with. Next phase will be to stick the rear wishbones on and start building up the rear suspension setup. So in the build manual, that's what you get after steps 10, 11 and 12. That's all pretty straightforward. The only really tricky part was getting the pins that go through there lined up. I fed the pins in through that end and then bolted that back plate on afterwards. And it was quite tricky getting them to line up. It was one of those occasions when you could do with a few more fingers or a couple more pairs of hands. But anyway, it went together. That's all done. Looks all really good. Let's move on to the next stage. So there's a completed rear gearbox. That stage is in the book 13 through to 20. All very, very straightforward. That went together really, really well. There's grub screws in the end of there. In the end of there. Rear anti-roll bars in. They're going to need to be adjusted. That needs to be set to 8.9mm, which I'll do shortly. And then the next phase of that after that is to bolt the rear gearbox to the chassis. Then it's on to working on the front. And there it is. That's the rear gearbox on the chassis. Literally just 4 big bolts hold that in. Easy to wind up using an electric screwdriver. That's got the rear gearbox on the chassis. Now it's time to start building the front gearbox. So that's the front lower wishbones on with the droop screws in and everything set up. I've left the Allen driver on the droop screws to show where they go. That was a much easier to build than the rear. Maybe it's because I've done it before, but that all went together very, very nicely. Now to start fitting the front shock towers. So that's got the front shock towers mounted on there, relatively straightforward. Those 2 screws there were really, really tight to get in. They took a lot of effort, but once I'd got them adjusted, everything sat down nicely. That's got the shock towers completed, and that covers sections 21 to 25 in the build manual. Now on to the next section. So there's the front gearbox gone together. That covers sections 26 through to 29 in the build manual. All very, very straightforward. The only difficult bit were those little rods that go through there that hold the hubs onto the stub axles. They were really, really tight, and I had to give them a bit of a clonk with a hammer to get them through. They really did need some persuasion to get in. Front anti-roll bars on there. That's relatively straightforward as well. All in all, a good couple of sections. All I need to do now is to bolt the front end to the chassis. Okay, that's the centre diff built up. That covers points 33 through to 35 in the manual. All very, very straightforward. In there, that's quite a key area. I set that up with the vernier gauge. That's got to be 17.3mm on both sides. Nothing too fiddly. I used some thread lock on those grub screws and the other grub screw that holds the brake cam on. All that needs now is the 4 M4 screws to bolt the centre diff into the chassis and line that up with the drive shafts. All very, very straightforward so far. That's got the centre diff in, the drive shafts are all mated up, everything turns out over nicely. Once again, apologies for the camera shake. Everything's mated in there nicely, and the brake cams are on. Next job is to build up the shock absorbers, which is section 36 in the build manual. Then we're going to be very, very close to having something that resembles a rolling chassis. So that's got the shock absorbers built up. That was all pretty straightforward. A couple of interesting points to note. Before you put the shock ends on, I would put the rubber boots on before you do that. Getting the rubber boots over the ball end was really, really difficult, and these three are going to come off. Building the shocks up down in there's a number of plastic washers, O-rings, spacers and things, and there's like a little spring retaining clip that goes in on the end. That's relatively easy to do, but take your time on that because the spring can ping off and then you're likely to lose it in the carpet if you're not careful. The only other point I would say when you're putting the springs on, let's zoom in a bit closer. Inside those black spring adjusters, there's like a rubber O-ring which makes those really, really tight indeed. They were really, really tricky to get on, and at one point I thought I'd cross-threaded them. Put a little drop of WD-40 or GT85 on there just to make those slide on easy, and they will wind up. If they're too stiff, then unwind them, put a little bit more GT85 on them, and then wind them back in again. That was the only hard part of building the shock absorbers. And they're all filled up with oil. I've got 650 weight in the front, and I've got 450 weight in the rear. Just now got to fit those to the car, then we're ready to go on to the next stage. So that's got the front shock absorbers on. That was all relatively straightforward and nice, easy fit. I love the way that those bits go in there. That like stainless steel pin goes through, and behind that there's a grub screw holding in. You don't screw that in or out, which will gradually wear away over the time. That's an incredibly tight fit that will last for ages. Same on the other side, going in front of the anti-roll bar. Down the back we have a similar installation. Again, you've got the grub. Yeah, you can just about make out the grub screw there and the pin that holds it in there. The gigantic rear shock tower as well, and that massive aerial wing mount. Next thing to do is start to assemble the radio trays and radio plates and get all of those mounted in there. I'll do that, then I'll fit them in, and I'll give you a talk through how all of that went together. So that's got the radio tray assembled, all very, very straightforward, just a load of screws and things that are going in there. There's some really small screws underneath those plates, so put those in first. One of the things that I think lets this kit down is that plate there. This kit is nearly 700 quid to buy, so I would have expected that to be supplied in carbon fibre, not some cheap plastic moulding, but hey ho, that's where we go. All I've got to do now is mount the radio tray in the car, then it's on to the next stage, which is mounting the fuel tank. So yeah, that's the radio tray and the radio installation in. I haven't put any servos in yet. They're going to be coming in shortly. Do those at the weekend. Just wanted to get the radio tray in. That all bolts up. There's 5 M3 bolts that bolt up from underneath. All pretty straightforward. No hidden pitfalls there. Next thing to do is to install the fuel tank. So that's got the tank in, and that's got the fuel piping for both the fuel pressure tubing in there and the main fuel auxiliary line in there. Again, a very, very straightforward fit, no hidden pitfalls. That just about brings the build of this car to a close. Overall, I've been reasonably impressed with this car. Yes, it's very, very expensive for what you're buying. There were some fittings missing, a couple of fittings missing, which wasn't very good. Luckily, I've got rackfuls of M3 nuts and bolts lying around, but if you were building this in your bedroom or on your dining room table, you might not have, and then you'd have to get some more sent down from the model shop, which would add a couple of days onto the build. I said earlier on that I would expect some carbon fibre bits to be included for the money. At nearly 700 quid, that bit should be supplied in carbon fibre, I feel. That's made some cheap and nasty plastic, that should be carbon fibre. It'd be nice if the radio tray was carbon fibre as well. Give credit where it's due, however. This fuel tubing is the best quality fuel tubing I think I've ever seen, and I've been building nitro models since 1990. That is absolute top of the range stuff. It's also good that it's included in the kit as well. 2 weeks after I started building this model, it's just about ready to go. The Ronda Drake engine and pipe are in there. It's just about to have its first tank of fuel put into it. I sent the engine away to a company called Answer RC, who did an oil bath bedding in service for me, where they run the engine for 6 hours in a tank of hot oil just to bed it in. This engine is unbelievably tight. It's brand spanking new. I've been building RC nitro engines for over 30 years. That's the tightest engine I've ever seen, and I wasn't sure that my starter box was going to turn it over. But Answer RC have run it in using the oil bath treatment. I just decided to paint the shell a very, very boring yellow colour. After spending hours painting the last shell, and it got smashed in half at the second meeting, I thought I can't be bothered to spend hours painting a shell in ornate colours. Also, painting it bright yellow like that, my eyesight isn't what it used to be. I should be able to see it better from the other side of the track. It's got the OS Ronda Drake engine in it, along with the appropriate pipe for that engine as well. Really, really nice pink coloured cylinder head. It's got Ronda Drake signature on it. Let's take the engine outside and start it up and run the car up for the first time. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching this video of me going through the overview of how I built my Kyosho Inferno MP10 TKi 2.0. It's Friday evening here. It's taken me 2 weeks to build this model. It probably only took a few days to build the initial model itself, but once you get the linkages back in, I always think it takes almost as long to build the basic model as it does to set the linkages up and set the suspension up. It's in a basic setup now. Hopefully I'm going to race on Sunday. The weather forecast for the UK this weekend isn't brilliant. I really don't want to get my brand new Pride and Joy covered in mud, but we'll see what happens. If not, I'll race it sometime in the very, very short future. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching me build my MP10. If you've got any questions, please do ask away, post, comment, etc. In the meantime, see you trackside. Bye bye for now.